All right. Good Sunday afternoon. So, yes, hopefully today we've got good audio and good visual. StreamYard has been giving me a little trouble here lately, but hopefully we got it worked out. So, one of the things that I wanted to get into today is, everyone is very nervous about the situation in Iran and with good cause. I mean, when we stop and think about it, we literally have the entire world, shivering here financially. And again, I got to go back to what did the chart say? I actually see that this rabbit hole, of course, I don't think I'd call it a rabbit hole. I think I would call it a snake hole, actually. But it's truly what I would say is it almost looks like they're not going to ever surrender, ever. And this is why we're seeing such an intense military campaign that's going on right now. And intense it is. I had mentioned before, back in the 60s, my dad and my uncle would blow stumps out of the ground with dynamite. And I actually looked up on the internet. I said, how far do you have to be away from an explosive missile? And of course, every missile is going to be different depending on the amount of explosives it has in it. But you know that I think at 140 decibels, your eardrums literally will have permanent damage. You can literally blow out a person's eardrum from explosives like that. Now, if you think about it, the amount of it, even if you didn't get killed by the missile, the sound pressure alone. In fact, the military actually says the best thing to do is get on the ground. If you see a blast, plug your ears and open your mouth to equalize the pressure. So I'm just thinking about what's going on in Iran and how intense that's got to be for the innocent people who aren't in this fight. And of course, there's always civilians. Every war has its casualties in military, but what about all the civilians? Absolutely crazy when you stop and think about how intense this is. And what about Ukraine? What about all the other wars? I remember back in the 60s, I had an uncle who had come back from the Vietnam War. He was in the Green Berets, and in fact, that was my grandfather's son. And he was telling me of how intense it was over there. And, I don't think any of us realize who aren't in the military, we're just civilians, how intense war is. It's intense. And I think we're dealing with an ideology over there. The astrology says this is going to settle and they're going to get the Strait of Hormuz open. Timing may be hard to get, but I get it's going to happen. I think what's happening, there's a really good podcast. It's called Navy Decoded, and I'll just play a short clip off of this. And what this gentleman had said is that we have this underground sonar, plus we have these robotic arms that literally come in. You can see right there, that's a submersible where they can actually track and find all of these different mines. Plus, we have robotics that can go down underneath there and trigger these things. And moreover, we have other types of things that they can actually drag and trigger the weaponry. No other Navy in the world, they say, has this. So they'll get the Strait of Hormuz open. What I'm hearing, and this is why we're hearing all the ground troops coming in there right now, is because they're going to first eliminate the ability to relay the mines. And also, I think we're going to see a few more things going on. I've heard rumors that there may be $120-something billion of gold that was actually put underground in Tehran. And again, I have to say, this is ancient Persia. And ever since World War I, the Strait of Hormuz has been a monopoly for many of the upper echelon. Not only does oil and gas go through there, I hear helium goes through there and other precious resources go through this. And the one who's going to get hurt the most is going to be Asia. Also California too, because California, with their green new principles, have literally shut down almost all of the oil production. And of course, Trump just reinstituted that off the coast of Santa Barbara up there. They're now pumping. They're turning on these oil platforms and they're bringing oil into the refineries here. So we're going to see a lot of changes here coming up. And I think this is going to resolve. I keep getting a positive like this is not the end of the world. This isn't World War III. We know the Houthis are now joining, to go after Saudi Arabia's oil pipelines to the west. It's all the same, you could say, funded regimes here. And even with the whole thing in Iraq, Iran was funding a lot of these IDEs and so on and so forth that happened. So this is a big operation, and it is very complex. And I think just give it time. That's what I get. I get it's definitely going to happen here. So if we just maybe take a deep breath, one of the things that I've been asked about repeatedly is to do a podcast and a deep astrological analysis on Trump. And I'm going to do that. I just figured I'd wait for the No King's Day to, settle down a little bit here. I was driving yesterday and they were protesting up and down the streets. And again, I've heard, the billions and billions that are poured into the propaganda machines here to fund all this. And so we're seeing a lot of dissension here. Again, it's a war between the globalists and the nationalists, which kind of brings me to the topic today: good versus evil, and the matrix of that, or you could say the matrix of good and evil. And so many people I've been speaking to, geez, my kids just constantly on AI or on the phone or social media. And when I really reverse this out and I stop and I think, we have throughout history been influenced by propaganda, by the mind control system of this world. And I have to say, the way to really go into this, and I'm going to share my screen here for just a second because this is kind of fun. I put up some little things here that'll kind of help clarify what I'm about to say. Well, one of the most important things is this matrix that we call planet Earth. And what's really fascinating, and again, I mentioned this diagram a lot, that literally whatever your concept in divinity is, it certainly seems to be outside of lower creation. Let's put it that way. In fact, this little Ein Sof, and Ein Sof, or are phrases that mean it's actually lenses to bring the light of divinity down into creation. And like I'd mentioned, souls are created up here in the worlds known also as absolute. You could just say it's a very divine set of heavens where extremely divine energy is existence. Well, what's interesting is they claim there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions in each of these worlds. And the next worlds down is the much denser worlds of creation. And then notice this big red line. Well, one of the things I always mention is the ancient text. And of course, in the West, we've got what? The Garden of Eden story, where there was this war in heaven and divinity, or God, however you want to say it, cast down the evil spirits. This is the exact same story that we see in the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, and many other texts. And I have to mention, too, some of the Egyptian texts, as well as the Chaldean. The Chaldean magic will scare the heck out of you. I've got some documents on that. And this is an interesting topic, that word called magic, right? A lot of people hear about that. Well, notice where I'm going to go to next. This is the Western division of this, but this is known as the 72 angels and demonics of the Shem Hemiforish. Now, if anybody's never heard that term, Shem Hemiforish is the spirits, or you could say the mixed angels, that are encoded in each quintessence of the zodiac of Exodus. Now, isn't that interesting? Exodus, we've heard about that, right? Moses part of the Red Seas and all that. So there's a lot more meaning to that than I think is just given to it in religions at this time. And they say that these 72 angel, or you could say mixed forces, are kind of the, you could say, regulators of the zodiacal energy. And here's even what's more mystical. We have a tropical zodiac, which is denser and closer to the earth. And we also have the sidereal. And there's many different texts out there that are quite interesting. And one of them, of course, most people have access to the Bible. Well, if you read Exodus, it's more of a, story of what happened with the Israelites and all that, but it's metaphorical for the soul. Now, if I go back to this literal diagram here of creation, they actually say the entire universes are balanced forces of good and evil. And if you look at matter itself, this big red line could be, if you will, the beginning of what we would call the matrix of creation, the physical worlds, where spirit now gets transposed into a garment of matter. And when you think about that, that's happening in all forms of life. I don't care if it's a cocoon, right? Or an egg laid by an animal, or you could say a fetus in an animal or a human being. And I do believe there's other advanced beings just like us as well. There's overwhelming evidence to that, both on this planet and off of this planet. And what's interesting is this is where creation, or the female principle, creates a garment for the soul of whatever type to have a physical experience. Well, what's fascinating even deeper about that is good and evil. Every single physicist will tell you matter is made up of some component of energy. Of course, they call them molecules and atoms, right? Positive protons, electrons, all this stuff, right? So, and of course, the difference between the hair on our heads and the computer screens we're staring at, if you're listening to this on a computer or a phone, is the molecular makeup of exactly what that substance is. And of course, we as humans have become pretty damned advanced at creating a lot of different materials, plastics, all these things that we create, including the air we're drawing into our lungs right now. And the blood coursing through our veins is all just matter that's coalesced into very intelligent forms and substances that we call life. And when you think about this, the entire physical universes, they say, are composed of energy. Well, what's creating all this energy? They say angels, right? Angels, spirits, and intelligences. And it's really, when you go down the rabbit hole, if you look up here at this very high, high heaven, many people will refer to them as the seraphims or the orphanums. These are the angels believed to be surrounding the throne of divinity, or God, if you will, right? And then you have the cherubims and the thrones. So there's different names for these, but these are exceedingly high angels. They actually say if these angels were not chanting the permutations of creations, the entire universes would cease to exist in less than a nanosecond. So if you think about that, we're literally in a matrix of positive and negative energies. And that's really fascinating when you think about that, because take DNA, okay? We all are now fascinated with DNA. How many people have gone out there and said, well, I'm going to find out who my relatives are. I'm going to look at the tree, the family tree, all this stuff. And this gets really deep down the rabbit hole of what is genetics? What is DNA? Well, my opinion is that, and also talking to some people who know a lot more about it than I do, is that the soul might be what is connected to this exceedingly complex genetic code of creation. And this is very mysterious. And when you think about it, your DNA is different than any single person's DNA on this planet, cut and dried. In fact, the probabilities they use now, of course, in legal systems, I forget what it is. It's an exceedingly high ratio that the probabilities of you having the same DNA strand as someone else is almost impossible. Nothing's 100%, but it's very, very high. And of course, we're seeing, people exonerated and also incarcerated based on, things that the legal system couldn't prove before, but now they do it with genetics. Well, why am I bringing all this up? Is because we have a physical body that is prepared in a garment for the mother, or by the mother, in the womb. And when we exit that womb, which is really interesting, after about 9 months of gestation, and that umbilical cord is cut, that's when they say, astrologers will say, that's your birth chart. You see? In fact, the Egyptians and the Chaldeans actually looked at conception charts. There's mathematical ways you can go back and actually extrapolate the potential of when you were conceived, which is pretty interesting stuff, because that has an element too. And it also shows a lot of things about past lives that are quite possible. Ptolemy had talked about this, Dorotheus, and many other of the ancient astrologers. And some of the naughty stuff looks into that too. which is the knotty palm leaves in Vedic astrology. So very mysterious stuff. And of course, there's a lot of intuitives and psychics who talk about this, reading past lives. You can actually see this stuff in the yogas in your birth chart, which is very fascinating. But anyways, where am I going here? So what keeps us locked into this world of reincarnation? Of course, everybody's saying, oh my God, all the wars, all the stuff, and you think about the world, it is a tough place. We're all here going through our story, our movie. If you ever seen the little cartoon Rango, I love that cartoon. Johnny Depp had narrated it. Remember Rango? He falls off the truck and then ends up going into the town of dirt, right? And of course, what do you got there? A conspiracy. They're stealing all the water and everything else. And, Rattlesnake Jake, they get in the fight. So whatever movie you want to pick, we all got our story, right? Everybody's got a story. Every human being drawing breath has a story. We got parents, we got the journey we came to, and where we are now. What's interesting about astrology and where I'm going with all this is something is effectuating that. It's not just the astrology. Like astrologers around, oh, you're a Pisces, you're an Aries, you're a Taurus. No, you're not. You're a soul having a physical experience. And this is the mysteries of ancient astrology, is what caused that? What caused you to be incarnate in this genetic line? Mom and dad. I mean, you look at it, most people, they have some semblance to mom and dad. And interestingly enough, you can actually see in the birth chart, like for instance, my ascendant is exactly when my father was born. Isn't that interesting? And I've seen these correlations in different people quite frequently, meaning that you'll find somewhere in your birth chart, the sun and the moon, the ascendant, or something is going to line up with one of your parents. Very interesting stuff. Now, people say, well, I got 7 brothers or 12 sisters and brothers, whatever they got. Yeah, it gets complex there. But the oldest born really has an interesting connection to the parents. And where am I going with all this? Well, we see the wars, we see the trauma, we all, have our financial situations, right? Somebody's suing somebody over something, right? And the legal system is so dense. It's in some ways, we all have our bright night of the soul and we have our dark night of the soul, and we got all points in between. And isn't it interesting how the astrology cycles show this stuff? It shows it so accurately. It's kind of creepy. I had a wonderful thing happen to me last night. I come home and my son comes up and says, Dad, I'm really got a lot of anxiety. He says, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, Aiden, you got Saturn transiting your moon. He said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, that's called Sati Sate. And this is his first time. He's 24 years old. And of course, every single human being will live to see at least 1 or 2 for sure Sati Sates. If you live into your late 60s, 70s, depending on when it happens, you'll get the third one, right? So Saturn goes around the solar system just approximately 29.5 to 29 and a half years. So everybody goes to that barbecue at least 2 to 3 times in a lifetime. And it starts from the position of the moon and Saturn. Now I want to go back a little deeper into the matrix. And I talk about this stuff a lot, but I want to go into it even more. I'm going to share the screen one more time. And that is these diagrams that I speak about so frequently, which I think are really, really, really useful because it allows us to see many different, points of view from a psychological standpoint. Well, again, this diagram right here, I like because you can see the human body in it, right? And of course, these are the layers of the auric field around it. And they say these layers are really going out into the upper layers of the soul. The physical body is just that. It's the garment prepared by the mother in the womb. And there's a lot of mystery to the seed, the sperm and the egg and all this stuff coming together because it's just the physical genetics that are comporting through the spiritual aspects that allow us to obtain life in these physical bodies. And, it's pretty miraculous when you look at the body. Anyways, where am I going with this? Well, from a psychological standpoint, you could see this big, thick dashed line. That's the division most psychiatrists and psychologists will tell you. You have a hidden portion of the mind, often referred to as the subconscious mind. And down below here, you have the so-called conscious mind. Well, what's interesting is all the glyphs of the planets come from three symbologies: the circle, which is the seed, the sun and the stars are portals. A lot of people correlate those to angel or angelic forces. The moon, which is also indicative of mom's womb, is the crucible. And of course, time and space is the earth, right? In fact, time is a very interesting thing because sunrise, noon, and sunset is our day. If you were to change the rate of that speed, the rotation of the earth, or for you flat earthers, the cycle of the sun rising, cumulating, setting, and it's like clockwork. It's not kind of accurate, it's really accurate. The sun crosses the solstice exactly, or the equinoctial points at very accurate astrological timing points. And of course, we have the Gregorian calendar trying to fit over that, which is never perfect. That's why we have leap years. And, sometimes the spring equinox is on the 20th, other times it's on March 21st, right? But it always occurs at these astronomical, exact, precise positions. NASA and people who have to deal with space and satellites are really dialed into this. I know I had an opportunity of speaking with some of the programmers back in the early 80s, late 70s, when all this was coming online to where they were creating astrological programs. So the earth and timing is so unique. Anyways, why am I bringing all this up? Because we get into what I would like to call our perception of reality, known as the matrix of time and space. And if you come back here, this diagram I often use frequently because, again, notice this line is the division between the so-called subconscious hidden portions of the mind, which are really the upper three layers of the soul, and the lower, you could say, mechanics of this time-space continuum. We are so blocked. And I always tell that story how there is a mark that they say the angels make right beneath our nose, which is the mark of silence, right? Between the nose and the upper lip. It's not the only thing that indicates, but it's one. And it's meant to indicate a division between the so-called conscious and subconscious minds. Well, going back to this diagram, you'll find most Vedic astrologers pay a lot of attention to the moon. And they should, because the moon regulates what we call the manas of the mind. But when a child is born and the umbilical cord is cut and time and space starts, that's where astrologers are measuring everything from, because we're in time and space. And astrology seems to be the portals that regulate or interact with, you could say, our free will and consciousness. Well, the moon is, if I zoom in here, you can actually see it's what we call our emotional perception of reality. Anybody who studies astrology will find out right away. In fact, you can experiment with this yourself. Just get a calendar and see when the moon is trining Venus or conjuncting Venus or, making good aspects. Everybody's happy. When it's doing very malefic things like conjuncting Saturn, opposing Mars, squaring Mars, or whatever, you can feel it. It's really intense. So the moon it's almost like it's our mind trap. The lower conscious mind, see this big, thick, or it's actually a small, thick line here of this dash line, which is the division between, you could say, the lower spirit, which is the mechanics of, they call it Rosh, or some people like to get persnickety and say Ruach, but it's actually, I've heard it pronounced Rosh mostly. But Rosh is another word in Aramaic and Hebrew that means the lower spirit. It's what we drive the car with. It's how we walk around. It's our rational, you could say, consciousness, our awareness, our everyday life. And notice we take logic and reason and we emotionalize it. Now, why is that important? Well, today, we're seeing something encroach into the world, and we've been seeing it for a long time, but it's really coming online ever since 220 forward, that last Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Those have huge effects on the world, and most importantly, in 2020, we had a 200 and something year conjunction it's called the mutation conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter. That ushered in a new era. 220 forward has been a new era. And we've had a war here going on between your consciousness and mine and reality. The realities are shifting. And then also, we had another big conjunction in February of this year, 2026, which was this Saturn Neptune conjunction. And that happened in the very first Egyptian bound of Aries. For you tropical astrologers, that's really significant. And it happened right next to a very powerful fixed star in the sidereal zodiac. So this is really where reality is changing. And a lot of people are saying, but my kids are all on social media, and every parent should be concerned about that. And a lot of people are making such good friends with Chat GTP or some AI engine that it's becoming their little friend, right? And I have to say, AI is an extraordinary tool. You can look up anything anymore. I mean, literally doctors I know are jumping on AI and looking up things. I see attorneys doing it because the laws change so fast, and AI and the internet is so connected to everything. Almost reminds me of Skynet, doesn't it, in Terminator? Anyways, why this is so interesting is because the ebbs and flows of good and evil always seem to keep going. Again, we see the prosperity, we see the recessions or the hiccups in financial worlds and markets, and then we see the destruction and war. Isn't that interesting? And this whole thing with Iran has gotten a lot of people really worried. And again, rightfully so. I mean, we know that that is a very entrenched situation over there, and it's been funded to be entrenched. And I still maintain that things are going to become extremely violent there before it ends. And it has been. I don't think we have any concept of just what has happened over there. The thousands and thousands of sorties and destructions that we see on the internet, or on the TV. We see these little flashes of light says unclassified. I don't think we have any idea what it would be like if you were within a mile of that place. Again, even if the shrapnel didn't hit you, the concussion and the power of those bombs is stunning. Absolutely stunning. So we're seeing some violent destruction. Well, that brings me back to this whole model of creation. They actually say that divinity, or God, if you will, destroys all the universes. Just literally everything gets obliterated about every 4.3 to 4.6 billion years. There's actually a text that's really interesting. It's a number of texts. The Vedas are one of them that are probably the most conclusive, or at least point to these kinds of things. And another one is called the Puranas. Look at this thing. This is a huge text. I hope I got it the right way. Yeah, I got it upside down. It goes like that. But this is known as the Puranas. You get done reading that, let me know. I certainly haven't read it all. But it's fascinating stuff because the Puranas, the Vedas, again, when you say the Vedas, that's a collection of texts. You can see the Samhitas, the Rig Veda, the Ajur Veda, the white and black, all kinds of Artha Vedas. These are very obscure texts that are translated, of course, into English. And there's verses in there that talk about the destruction of all the universes every 4.3 to 4.6 billion years. And it's not exact, but it's right around there. And what was fascinating about that is science, hard left science, is coming back saying, well, we think the universe is about 4.3 to 4.6 billion years old. There's variances in there. But how about that? I mean, when I think about that, it's interesting how these ancient texts mirror what's happening in modern day science. And where I'm trying to go with all this is the most important thing in the world to me that I think has not been expounded upon enough is our minds, our consciousness, our awareness. We are all programmed by what we believe and what we've been exposed to. There's been so many experiments done in psychology where you put an individual in an environment or you examine what environments they came from, the upbringing, the exposure, the parents, the schools, everything else. I've got a couple of clients of mine who are involved in some of the university systems financially, and they said, Jeff, you have no idea the billions of dollars that get propagated into these university systems. I wonder why. It's not only just for education, but it's also to direct who gets to learn what way they serve it up. And again, no educational system's perfect, and education is very important. You got to learn skills when you learn things. But it's very interesting how the propaganda machines of good and evil seem to always be vying for the mind of the youth. And very, very interesting stuff. We could talk about that one all day. But yeah, the programmed ego somebody's mentioning, exactly right. And this is what I think the Saturn Neptune that just happened in February has such a huge effect on. A lot of people have been talking about this because the more we realize, like Shakespeare said, this planet is like a big theater. It's a big stage, and we're the actors, and the movie we're playing is what we allow the conscious mind to receive. I just read a report lying in bed early this morning about how the North Koreans are sending all these people who are told, hey, you can go to Russia and work and make a lot of money. And they get there. And these people are working 16 to 17 hours a day. They're beaten within an inch of their lives. They have to pay into this fund. When they're done working for a month, out of the $800 or $900 they made, they might have $10. And nobody can communicate with them. Nobody can talk to them. It's really horrible. Now, doesn't this sound familiar? You hear about, Kim Jong-un and some of the way these people are treated over there. You hear about Mao in Russia. You hear about Stalin, I should say Mao in China, and Stalin in Russia. If we go back through time, we find this despotic stuff going on. It's just like the kingdoms. The kings used to put spiked boots on people's feet and crank them down so that they would admit their guilt. Does that sound familiar? So we see the same coercional tactics, and also the good and evil pulling. Even the American legal system, I always say it's the finest system money can buy. If you can hire the right law firms, you can literally create any reality you want. And I'm not saying the legal system doesn't have its merits, because it does. There's a lot of really smart people in the legal system. I used to work a little bit in forensics, and I was pretty impressed with some of the minds that I met. But I also was pretty unimpressed with some of the coercion and legal things that you see manipulated behind the scenes. And any good lawyer will tell you it's an interesting business. And again, right here. So money seems to always enter the situations, like Rothschild said, right? You give me control of the money, and I care not who makes the laws. And isn't it interesting? It's always about the money and the material pleasures of this world. Well, all the religions have always taught, any of them, that pay no attention so much to that man behind the curtain as much as pay attention to you, your journey, your own journey, because we're all going to exit this place. But it's always about the money. And I see this so many times. I get so many interrogations, people calling me up. Well, so-and-so stole my inheritance, or they did this, or somebody cut me out of that, or something, that was unjustly done. And this is what's interesting, is the hatred or the consciousness sticks with us when we exit this garment known as the body. And this is, by the way, I'm going to be on Coast tonight. And that's why I kind of did this. I thought, this was kind of fun to be on Coast. And I don't know what happened there. But on Coast, I'm actually not going to be on with Terry Garr. They just told me that I think it's going to be Wexler's who I'm going to be on. I'm going to be on with a gentleman named Ryan Recker. So that'll be midnight Pacific time tonight till 2 a.m. So you can bet I'll be pouring coffee at about 11:30. But anyhow, this should be a fun show, because we're actually going to talk about ghosts, disincarnates, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and also entities. And, when I go to that diagram, I just... it's called Ryan Recker. Somebody's saying Ryan who? Ryan Records, Wrecker. He's a host that fills in on Coast to Coast, or I think he does a show. I haven't met Ryan yet, but I hear he's a really nice guy. So we'll see where it goes. Lisa, I apparently couldn't make it tonight. So again, the show is going to be focusing on this myriad of the lower astral worlds. And how many people do we know have said, well, I think the place is haunted, right? I think there's a ghost. I think so-and-so is possessed. And this is an interesting topic because this is why I wanted to bring this up. And we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. And that is the whole world, this whole matrix of reality of time and space on Earth alone is so deep. I mean, we've all experienced very unusual situations, where we've either said, we think the place is haunted or we can feel energies when we come in and out. And, when you talk about the vastness of creation, and then you just focus on the earth alone, they actually say, here, let me show you this here again. I'll come back to that same diagram because that diagram, you could explode this thing a zillion times here. And if I go to share the screen, you'll see here what I'm, again, talking about when I zoom in. See, this diagram, when you talk about this big thick line here, I talk about this red line. That's the beginning of the multiverses. And if I zoom in here, you can actually see this is also known as the Yetziratic world. That's a Kabbalistic term. If anybody has ever heard of a book called the Sefer Yetzirah, that means the book of creation, where physical time and space starts. And it's not just the Earth. I mean, there could be myriads of planets and spaces like this. Again, when you look at, the possibility of that, it's, quantum physicists and theoretical physicists have been playing with these ideas a long time. They actually say there could be multiple dimensions that are going on right outside of this one. And I believe they absolutely are. And here's what's interesting is when we incarnate and the umbilical cord is cut, that's when time and space starts here. And we're knocked out. The lower conscious mind begins to form. If anyone's ever raised a child, or been around babies, right away, first off, they can't talk. Most of them can't stand up and walk around, right? By the end of the first year, we're usually standing. Some can actually walk a little bit. They certainly crawl. And they're beginning to understand the words and recognize. We're really smart. The human mind, the gray matter is smart. But what's interesting is that by the second year, we are so busy with all the impressions that we get. By the seventh year, we're really wired to this world. And I always mention Laura Hirsch. We did a podcast. If anybody hasn't seen this podcast, you can go on my podcast, YouTube here, and go back to the recorded section. And you'll see Laura Hirsch. It was last summer. And really a great podcast because what we spoke about on this was how autistic children are proving they're not crazy or stupid. They're really smart. They just can't talk to you and I like we talk. That might have been where we got in trouble is when we learn how to speak, right? So the bottom line is, what's so fascinating to me is I think it was a psychologist or a doctor. You can also look up the telepathy tapes because it talks about this. The telepathy tapes are all about these children that are exhibiting incredibly psychic traits and methods that they can communicate with deceased people, animals. They can read people's minds. And how they're able to do this now is through a device called spelling to speech. They're learning how to actually spell the way you and I speak, right? So what's interesting is because they didn't develop their lower conscious mind in the same trajectory that we did because of autism or whatever else happened to them, they developed the other psychic facilities. And it's unequivocal. I mean, if you read Laura Hirsch's book, which is a wonderful book about her son, Trevor, he literally would tell her, my horse that he rides told me his friend, another horse, died 6 months ago. And he even gave him the name, gave the mother the name. The mother goes back to the equine center and says, was there a horse here about 6 months ago that died named such and such? Oh, yeah. Yeah. How did you know that? Well, my son, Trevor, told me his horse told him that. Now, these are the autistic children. And maybe that's why many of them are angry, is because they can't get through to us. Now, this goes full circle back into why I put up this diagram, the astral plane. When we exit this world, Edgar Cayce, the Monroe Institute, so many different people have spoken about this. Again, one of my favorite books is Dr. Carl Wicklund, and that's 30 Years Among the Dead. That is an incredible book. And here, I actually have a little thing I can show you here today. This is the books I was speaking about. Let's see if I can find them here. They're somewhere on here. Yeah, there you go. The Unquiet Dead was by Dr. Edith Fiore. The Spiritual Releasement Manual was put out by Dr. Baldwin. And there was, this is a good book too, Malachi Martin. This is the book I was speaking about, 30 Years Among the Dead. That's the older book cover. But he's probably the first modern psychiatrist who documented this stuff so well. And of course, I always mention Carl Jung, who I like an awful lot. Carl Jung did a lot of experimentation with astrology and consciousness that was quite fascinating. But anyways, back to the other diagram that I was showing. The astral plane, also known as the worlds of Asea, they claim has 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions. If you've ever seen the movie with, it's called What Dreams May Come. It was by Robin Williams. What an incredible book. I'm sorry, movie, not a book. That movie talked about how he went into all these astral dimensions and saved someone who committed suicide. See, so what's fascinating is when we leave this physical garment known as the body, or what we call our daily lives in time and space, a lot of people get really confused because they're programmed to believe whatever we're programmed to believe by whatever secular thing you've been involved with, religious or societal belief systems, right? And many of your ancient cultures were very aware of this. The indigenous tribes often said, you're going to go to the great hunting ground or to the life after and experience all kinds of things. So many different cultures talked about this. Look at the Egyptians, the Book of the Dead, and so many other, trails. What's interesting is us Westerners in the Western perception of reality, I think are becoming to realize that we don't die. Nobody dies. And little kids can often see this as well because their psychic abilities are still very strong. And why I bring this up is because we keep reincarnating in this lower world, if you will, between the so-called astral planes and the lower hells, if you will, back and forth for quite a number of time. No one knows how many. I certainly don't. What's interesting about Vedic astrology is you can kind of see when somebody's ready to come out of the oven, when it's a more advanced soul by the placements of the moon and the nodes. In fact, many of the ancient Nadi astrologers knew when a very spiritual person was reborn. So they knew the Dalai Lama. There's so many interesting yogas in Vedic astrology that show that. And what's interesting is notice down here, there's a word called the Nefesh. There's a book that I mentioned many, many times. It is an excellent book. If you can find it, it's called the Shari Hagilgam. It actually has these very models that I'm displaying in these trees that I drafted it from, and other excellent books. Sharar means gate, Hagilgam means cycling of the soul. And what does this all mean in plain English? Well, it is literally the journey of the soul. And here's a little interesting trivia for you. Talk about the solar system being a matrix. Well, there is some really interesting astrological issues. The moon takes about 28 days to go around the zodiac, if you will, right? But it takes about 29.5 days to catch back up to the new moon. Now, it's not exact because of the elliptical orbit of the moon around the Earth, but it's approximately that. Now, here's what's even more bizarre. Saturn takes 29.5 years to go around your birth chart. Again, it's not exact, but it's close. Now, we got 29.5 days, 29.5 years. Something's going on here, folks, that's a little deeper. The Sharia Gilgam talks about this, and it talks about it really well. The Nefesh, which is what we would call our lower perception of reality. See, Nefesh. This is why AI ain't never going to be like you and I, because we take logic and reason and we emotionalize it. See, everything we do is emotionalized. We always tend to take whatever happens to us, and we emotionalize it. This is why many people go to therapists and psychiatrists, psychologists, or they medicate themselves to get away from the emotional turmoil that they feel. And maybe that's what this place is all about, is to cure the soul. They actually say after a number of times, notice if I come up here, the neshama is a strange word for the bondage of the soul, the karma that binds us down into these reincarnation. Remember, 29.5 days, 29.5 years. Something's going on. fact, David Icke had talked about the soul matrix trap of Saturn and the moon. And I'm telling you, he and many others have discovered this in the past. And Vedic astrology talks about this as well. See, the lower conscious mind, also known as the manas of the mind, which is a strange word in the Vedas that talks about the traits of the mind. This is what psychiatrists, they categorize you in little square boxes. What kind of personality trait are you, right? What conditions are you? Well, this is nothing new. It's been going on for thousands of years. And what's interesting is if you look at this diagram, you can go up the ladder. This is the world of time and space. And I think there's many of them, just like planet Earth. This is the world of time and space. And it's very fascinating about incarnation. Reincarnation happens, they say, because you keep having to dissipate the karmic elementals that are attached to you. What are karmic elementals? They're thought forms that we emit out of the third eye chakra. Very deep, deep stuff. Notice if we go up the ladder here, the neshama is a strange word in the Sharia Gogam, which means the bondages of the soul through these multiple lifetimes that keeps pulling us back down. Now, notice if you go past this line, now you get into the Briatic worlds, which is known as Hokmah, which is another word synonymous for wisdom, the wisdom of the soul. When the soul starts remembering all these past lives and releases its emotional reaction to all this stuff that got hammered into us through these incarnations and this world. You see? So, very interesting. If you ever heard of Rasputin, who was one of the mystics in Russia, I mean, I could go on different stories where these people realize they become self-aware consciously. Many Christian saints and rabbis have said the same thing. Go ahead, burn me. Go ahead, dip me in oil. We don't care. Skin me alive. Because we know this physical body is just the vessel I'm in for right now, even though nobody wants that to happen to them. But it's interesting how consciousness seems to expand and we remember all these movies we played. And then we go, last but not least, into what the wisdom and purification of the soul is up here. That's also where souls are created. It's like a big diving board in some ways. You dive off the diving board and you go into all these realms of creation. You experience in various worlds of time and space, and then you crawl back up the ladder again. And it's your, I guess, free will, whether we dive back off the diving board. It's like a high dive, So it's very interesting. And the archangels, Archangel Michael is fire, which is also indicative of creation and the spirit now becoming manifest. Then you have the air, which is fire and air are always create combustion. Then you have the water, which is really dense in the creation, Yetziratic world. And last but not least, you got the earth, or better yet, the material realms, the physical realms, which is deep, 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 deep stuff. So I just wanted to talk about that because a lot of people have been saying, oh my God, it's so traumatic. When's Iran going to end? When's this going to end? And you listen to these people who've been involved in wars. Go talk to some old veterans and stuff, and they'll tell you. In fact, my first boss was a drill sergeant in World War II. Again, that'll give you an idea how discipline went on that job. And he was actually a nice guy compared to my dad. But anyhow, the bottom line is, he told me the horrors that went on. I mean, he literally saw people eating people because they couldn't get food on these islands in the South Pacific. They later pulled him and he went in there. And, I've heard stories again from my uncle from Vietnam. I mean, again, many veterans will tell you war is like hell. And it's interesting that the world always comes to this, to war. Again, prosperity, recession, depression, and ba-boom, right? And you wonder, why does this world keep going through these cycles? Some are just wars, some are unjust wars. I'm not going to get into whether this one is just or not, but it's always good and evil playing itself out. And it's our reactions to it. Again, look at these poor people that are shipped off to Russia and they're working in these working camps. Look at the Uyghurs over in China. I mean, you can go on and on and on and on, and you can see injustices even right in this country where people are in like hellhole situations in their lives and in families and in situations that are pretty challenging. Again, my son had shared with me a while back. I got to show you this. This is funny. Some artist put this together. It was in a great little cartoon, but I show this one a lot because it's actually quite good. It is a little cartoon about Earth. Look at that. Can we please stop? I have to pee. And of course, they're flying by in their little space capsule. No, let's just go to the next one. The review on this place are horrible. The Earth is a really interesting place, and Vedic astrology actually shows that it's a place where good and evil karmas play out. It's so bizarre, and again, nobody can figure out the mysteries of the soul roots attached up in these upper realms. Why do we get born to this person? Why do we marry this person? Why do we have an incarnate with this one? Have a lawsuit with that one? Have this or that? Or really good things. You ever notice some people come along in your life and they'll, for no reason at all, they just help you, and it's like divine intervention. And here's the thing I want to kind of close with is divinity is always on the high side. Even though it looks like hell, they say God or divinity always sends down into creation fail safes until maybe it fully implodes in that 4.3 something billion years. And I think many worlds implode and recycle too on their own times. This is, look at the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars. It's a lot of rocks there. And I don't think they just got there on their own. Remember the Millennium Falcon? They had to fly through the asteroid belt. That's used a lot in movies. So pretty interesting stuff. But anyways, I'll take a look at a couple of comments here, and then I got to roll because it's getting a little bit late here for me in the afternoon. I couldn't get going early today. But they said, Jeff, will the Artemis launch on April 1 be a success? I don't know. I haven't looked at that, but that would be something to cast an interrogation on. And I can't get into that right now, or it'd be I actually have to speak to someone in New York about an interrogation that just called me before the show, and I got to get back to him. But anyhow, a lot of look at somebody saying here, yeah, we're all brothers and sisters, and I'm still learning the zodiac. Yeah, well, trust me, you'll never. There are so many secrets to astrology. I've seen zodiacs that are completely. There's a lot of secret zodiacs. One uses the star Draco. I've seen some of the older Vedic astrologers use different Ayanamshas, reference points that the tropical zodiac is referenced to. So a lot of deep stuff here. And again, I humbly submit, I'll be lucky if I live 3 lifetimes and figure all this out. But it's interesting. I had another discussion earlier today with a client about their guardian angel. Again, I always mention, I make these pendants with guardian angels, and she's really into numerology and she loves guardian angels. And I thought, wow, that's so cool, And again, you could see here, these are angels. And no, that's the 4 archangels above that emerald up there. And this is the person's guardian angel around the bottom. And this is such a fascinating thing because you come up with numerology that represents your specific journey in this incarnation, in this garment. So that's the angel who kind of dropped you off, they say, if you will, and will possibly pick you up when you exit this body. So, and I find so many interesting things about correspondences in the biblical, scriptures. And you can see, I'm also doing a lot of engraving now on simple pendants, so you don't have to spend all this money on, really large medallions, though a lot of people like them. But so cool stuff. And again, I'm always doing designs here so that everything touches the skin, which you can see right there. It's a lot of fun. And what's so interesting about gems is that they resonate with the planetary energies. So if you wear a gem, you're likely to experience a slightly different energy than someone else, depending on the configurations of your chart. You see, so we're all like fine-tuned tuning forks. And gems transmit, or you could say resonate, with the planetary angelic forces in them. And that's why natural gems are so important. Lab-grown gems, you can buy them if you want. They look beautiful, but they don't have any energy. And heat-treated, irradiated, or altered gemstones, which I've seen for hundreds of years in estate sales, have been going on forever. And that's because the miners want to heat them and darken them down so they have less inclusions and a darker color. they're prettier. Well, you don't want that. You want a natural gem. It's like a tuning fork. If you wrapped yarn around it, you would dampen it. So it's really, really cool stuff to look into. And again, I always, was questioning gems in the beginning, but I have to say they have a profound energy, and so many people have told me that. And belief is not required. They seem to work on the outer layers of the etheric double, which is the energy that life force comes in through. So they can have a profound effect on you. And interesting stuff. Again, many of the Masons and secret societies and religions, I mean, you see the same thing, the Pope running around, you see the breastplate of Aaron, the kings and the queens and the pharaohs. They would use this stuff. And I have a lot of people in politics and in various business of they know they have power. I just had a gentleman recently. He said, I can really feel this. He's driving home in his car and he said, yeah, just put it on. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's pretty wild. That's what happened to me. So anyways, I'm going to kind of terminate this thing here. But if anybody does join me on Coast tonight, that'd be fun. If not, you can certainly listen to it. I know they archive these things, but it should be a fun speak about the ghosts and out-of-body experiences and clearing techniques too we could possibly get into tonight. So it's a lot of fun. And again, it's a vast topic that no one knows everything about. And the interesting thing about clearing elementals and things is it's all with the mind. It's amazing. Again, Edgar Casey said astrology is like right about here in the level of influence on the mundane lower conscious mind. But got to remember the part that we're blocked from is that upper three layers of the soul, which many people allude to as the intuition, the spirit, the hunches that we all get. And we're educated away from that in this dark, dense world of money and power and all the physical influences, which are very powerful. And some of them are very enjoyable. We all enjoy the sunshine. We enjoy having pleasures, right? The physical world. But on the other hand, it's just an experience. And it seems that, I talk about many books like the Magus of Strovolos, Manot Yehuda. I put that up accidentally before. That's an incredible book about all these different stories of disincarnate souls who got trapped in the lower conscious world because they believe that's all that exists. So it's interesting stuff. It's all mind. And I've talked to a lot of clients who are involved with the Monroe Institute, Edgar Casey's Institute, and also these books I mentioned, 30 Years Among the Dead. This makes us aware of these possibilities, which is so key. I always mention the movie Ghost. I love that movie because it really was all about being aware that you don't have a body anymore. So the only thing you have is your conscious psychic self-awareness, which is a thing we don't exercise enough, in my opinion, or at least awareness of it. It's extremely important. So with that, I appreciate everybody joining me. And someone's saying there's no such thing as evil. It's just an energy. It's a choice to go to the dark side. But the left-hand path is really how you learn. Well, in some ways that might be true. I do believe there's good and evil, but or the forces of that. It's just like astrology. A lot of people look at a Saturn return or a Saturn transit of the moon as bad. Well, they can be experienced as good or bad, depending on our reaction to it. What's interesting is creation itself is birth, growth, maturity, experience, atrophy, and death. No one escapes it. Some of us are really blessed. We just atrophy in a minute and go, that's it, we're out of here. I've seen people who, I'm a little tired today. My grandfather, he says, I'm tired. I'm going to go up and lay down. He never woke up. So that's a blessing. That's a quick atrophy, right? So, it all depends. Other people go through horrible medical situations and, you got to scratch your head and go, wow, everyone's on their own individual, unique journey. Someone saying, I'm reading the Magus of Strovolos. Thanks for the recommendation. I'm about 3/4 through it. That is an amazing book because he did astral travel, out-of-body experiences. He actually learned to control his lower conscious mind so accurately, he could rebuild bones and molecularly shift energies, even take pain away, which I think we're all capable of. If anybody's been around Reiki or healing methods, if you learn to train your mind and focus in those areas. That's an area I'd like to focus in more, but I'm so busy with all the other things and readings that I'm doing, I don't get the time to do that. But I'm sure when I turn the pages in some of the cycles I've got upcoming, I'll get more into that. So it's a lot of fun stuff. We're all playing. It's like life is like a road, man. Every road has its straightaways, it has its corners, it has its hills and downhills and weather conditions, right? So that's what's interesting about astrology is it shows all those influences to you as the driver. So very interesting stuff. Somebody's saying here, yeah, lucky he did that at the times with all this. So, yeah, somebody's having a conversation about Wi-Fi, which is really very, very, we're all living in a soup of energies, but we live in spite of it. And it's really good to keep ourselves cleaned out. I would love reflexology. I mentioned that a lot. So, yeah, a lot of great comments here as always. Yep, someone says, I think Pluto is one of the toughest. Pluto is intense. I will say that. Pluto can be ruthless. And it's interesting, right now, we have a Kala Sarpa Yoga, which means all the planets are in between the eclipse points. And by the way, that was a note I made here earlier. We're actually going to see, literally on the 30th, which is tomorrow, the moon's going to sweep across the March 3rd eclipse point. And very powerful. It's actually not going to sweep across. It's going to make an opposition to it, which is sweeping across it. And we're going to find also right tomorrow, the moon breaks the Kala Sarpa Yoga. So for 2 weeks, the moon will be out on the other side of the nodal points, and then it'll dip back in a couple of weeks as we start heading back to, again, a new moon. So this full moon will happen, breaking the Kala Sarpa Yoga, which is very emotional. So we're likely to find the world at large is going to be very emotional. And of course, everyone's biting their fingernails to see when the fuel prices and the other prices drop. And I think they will. As I mentioned earlier, that text that clip I played, the United States has some very sophisticated mine sweeping and detection as well as elimination tools, unlike any other Navy in the world. And I think they're doing other things right now to make sure that when they actually clear that strait, and I'll make a prediction, I think we're going to take Carg Island. And I think we're going to actually maintain that whole Strait of Hormuz for a long time. See a lot of presence there. So anyways, that's all the mundane stuff that's going on, which is important too, because we all do live in this world. And I'll tell you, again, I always mention the United States, whatever you want to say about it, it is a much better place to live than some of the conditions I hear other people are living in. So it is, yeah, someone's saying, well, the Strait of Trump? It just might be. It just might be. And I still say this is much bigger than just Iran. The control systems that have been in from World War I, we are seeing stuff being changed at the top of the pyramid in the banking control systems. And you're also going to hear some other things going on very soon, in my opinion, this year about the financial structures. A lot of people have been mentioning quantum, other things. I think we're seeing huge changes in the structures and the debts that are being at play right now with the banking system. So we're going to see some really huge changes this year. And again, that's that Kala Sarpa Yoga. And most importantly, don't forget, I've been mentioning continuously the Uranus. Every 84 to 86 years, it goes through the Pleiades. That's what it's doing between now and May 2nd. And that's just conjuncting Alcyon. It's still going to keep passing through major times of disruption. And Alcyon always has to do with ruthless judgments. Things are not going to be tolerated anymore that were tolerated in the past. And that could get into some other things that I don't want to get too deeply into here. But just watch. A lot of people have rolled their eyes and said, nothing's ever going to happen with Comey and all this. Watch. That's about ready to cut loose. And from everything I can see, this is going to be a very, very eventful 250th anniversary of the United States. And I was just doing a show down in Australia. Same thing down there. We saw the same thing. Australia is going to be going through a major shift here as well, because Uranus is also aspecting points in that chart. And Australia is in what we call another Sarisate, a transit of the moon, which is always major transformations. And look at all the countries in Europe right now. And look at still, we got the same quagmire going on with Russia and Ukraine. And this is putting a lot of pressure on the BRICS nations. So we got stuff going on here that I think is way beyond what any of the mind control news is telling us. The astrology indicates that, and we'll see where it all goes. So, all right, with all that, I'm going to go. Some great comments here. If I stay any longer, I'll be too tempted to answer many of these great questions you guys are asking. I would like to take sometime and maybe just do a podcast addressing these questions only. That would be a lot of fun. So again, thanks so much for watching, and have a great weekend, what's left of it, and a great week. And I'll see you next week. Thanks so much.